Psychotics are more active when the moon is full, and this guy's a psycho.
Growing up, I never thought much of ghosts or, in general, the paranormal. As a child, there were a few occasions, but I never thought of it much until years later when I met my old best friend in high school. Let's call this old best friend Kay. Kay was very attuned with the paranormal. She would always tell me stories where she would hear tapping or scratching on the walls, voices sometimes distorted, or see figures, orbs, and mists in the hallway. It was not rare for her to accidentally interact with ghosts either, where in public places she would be approached and would hold conversations, only for strangers to give her weird looks because it seemed she was talking to herself. She would often have to visit her temple to be blessed. She's Buddhist, and she would wear white string on her wrists and ankles to school. I'll admit, I was never completely convinced with her stories, or in fact that ghosts were real until later incidents. Kay and I were still in high school at the time, and we were sitting in class at a table towards the back of the room. The table we sat next to was beside a window, and the walls of the class were entirely white. We were mindlessly chatting until I realized Kay was not looking at me when we were talking, but behind me. She looked scared and looked frozen. From the corner of my eye, there was a black mass that suddenly vanished the moment I turned my head to see what she was staring at. I was shocked because I was sure I saw something black hovering over my shoulder from the corner of my eye, only to later confirm with her that a black shadow was right behind me as we were talking. I was a little unnerved. However, I simply assumed if something was there, it was there because of her attraction to spirits rather than mine. However, more incidents occurred where I became more of a believer. Once again, Kay and I were sitting at a table. However, in this scenario, we were on a school field trip based on building leadership skills. It was lunchtime, and we were eating at another school's dining area, which was basically their own restaurant kitchen designated for culinary students, thus explaining the fancy tablecloths over the tables. At the table, Kay and I sat with a mentor who was discussing our goals for the future. I gazed over our mentor's shoulder and caught a corner of a tablecloth from another table lift in midair, as if something was holding it. There was 1, no one there at the table, and 2, absolutely no wind that day. It also seemed I was not the only person confused, as Kay was also staring at the corner of the tablecloth being held up. The moment our mentor turned her head to see what we were staring at, it dropped, leaving Kay and I baffled. I came to the conclusion these experiences were more likely to happen simply because I was with Kay. However, I figured out that's not really the case. I soon started to experience minor things at home that would leave me a bit spooked. In the kitchen, I would walk in and see cooking utensils that were placed in the sink fall onto the floor, despite being placed in the sink. No one else was in the kitchen. Windows were shut, and it would be impossible for wind to somehow move a wooden spoon from sink onto the floor. Once, I was showering and left a cabinet drawer open, only for it to close while I was in the shower. Note that these drawers were not flimsy, and it is impossible for any form of wind to close them. Additionally, the bathroom window was shut. These were only minor experiences, and I often doubted, thinking maybe I was just taking things out of context and exaggerating. In late 2016, several occurrences happened. I was sick from a case of gastro and had been vomiting until the early hours of the morning. I soon fell asleep around 3 a.m., only to wake up around 7 a.m., my usual waking up time, to see what appeared to be smoke. I shot up from my bed thinking that something had caught on fire since it was right near the power switch on the wall. Assuming my eyes were blurry due to the fact that I had just woken up, I rubbed my eyes, and it was still there. It looked like a thick white mist, and it slowly dissipated as I leaned closer. I felt calm and did not think of it as harmful or demonic. It was just in the corner of my room. It was not largely dispersed or anything. It was just basically in one particular spot. Later in the year, my older sister went to study abroad, so I moved into her room. Because I was often home alone, my old room made me incredibly uncomfortable, and I became a little paranoid. I lived in a house where anything and everything echoed. A door closing from one end of the house could be heard from the opposite end. I had been moving things from my old room to my sister's, and had left my laptop in my old room on the floor as I had just cleared out a majority of my things. I was in my sister's room when suddenly I heard music playing. It was a song I often listened to, so I walked back into my old room and found my laptop on YouTube playing that song. It sounds normal, but this laptop is a MacBook and was only a few months old. It was in top condition, and I often cleared the history browser out of habit. Checking the browser, it was completely clear, the way that I had left it, with the only other website used being the Google default page, the page it was on before I left the room. Nothing had been searched, even on YouTube. There was no way it could have landed on another site, since I never bookmarked pages. Another problem with my laptop happened when my mom was home with me. My sister had just arrived in Canada, and there were problems with her luggage, so my mom forced me to submit a lost luggage form online. I completed a form with my sister's travel details, but my sister messaged and said not to worry about it, so I refreshed the page, losing the information I had filled out. My mother then argued and said I should have submitted it anyway, so she came and sat beside me as we went to fill out a new form. I scrolled to the bottom of the form we had not filled out, and my mother soon pointed at my screen and laughed, where the address section was answered with "dummy." I was confused and weirded out. I had not touched the laptop, nor had my mom. She had actually asked if I wrote it, and has no clue how to work technology. As for this one, I'm unsure if it was just a dream. It's kind of hard to explain, but when I dream, there is never light. I can distinguish the setting, colors, time, day or night in my dreams, yet they always lack the authenticity of light or darkness. My dreams are also never completely realistic, and I'm always conscious that it is a dream. I could also see what was happening from my eyes, where when I dream it is as if I am a bystander. But anyway, back to the dream. I recall waking up one morning, my eyes opening slightly, when a woman walked into my room. My eyes were not completely open, so I couldn't recall her face. However, I knew she was fair-skinned and in a blue patterned dress. She spoke to me, commenting that I had moved into my sister's room, kissing me on the forehead in a motherly fashion. Her voice sounded similar to my mother, and I was fairly disoriented from being woken up, so I had assumed that she had come home and checked up on me. I just closed my eyes and went back to sleep. Back to what I know is reality. A few hours had passed, and I had woken up again. I went into the living room, expecting to see my mother, as I assumed she was home, only to see that I was home alone. I even checked the garage, and her car was not there. I soon took another nap in the afternoon, and woke up to my mom coming into my room and checking on me. It was eerily similar, yet dissimilar. My mother kissed me on the cheek, commented that I had moved rooms, yet her words lacked the same warmth. Other incidents include a friend's birthday party, where a few of us were messing around in the garage. The garage door was left open, so we were exposed to the street, and there was a large mirror on the wall. Me and one friend were busy taking photos in the mirror, while my other 3 friends were chilling outside of the garage on the street. I remember looking into the mirror and seeing something flash by the others who were playing around in the street. It was incredibly fast and blinding white. I had no idea what it was. The street was completely quiet. There were no cars, and it was definitely too fast to have been a car. I turned to my other 3 friends on the street, one of whom had the same confused look that I did. I asked her if she saw that too, and she told me that she saw a girl in a white dress run past the garage. These events don't happen often. They usually occur once every few months, and I'm not bothered by it, since paranormal events interest me in all honesty, and these odd things that occur to me aren't alarming or dangerous, at least not in comparison to my friends. In recent months, I felt a comforting hand on my shoulder, only to look in the reflection of my computer screen and see that no one is behind me. I also recently had my first occurrence of sleep paralysis, where a demonic woman crawled on the top of my body, kind of like The Grudge, but basically looked as if her body was decaying. I blame that on me watching too many horror movies, but I discussed it with my friends who said it was common when sleeping on your back or when you're stressed. They've also told me that watching movies can open you up to the attacks of the paranormal. I have heard a man's voice speak in my room upon awakening. There are no males in my household, my parents are separated. I've also seen a blue orb float down my hallway in the dark when I was home alone. Maybe it's my imagination. Perhaps it isn't. I'm not particularly concerned as I'm not bothered by it. But the only question I have is out of curiosity. Why have these things happened more as I get older, compared to when I was younger? And is it influenced by anybody around me? My senior year of high school, I started talking with this super hot emo punk kid named Brian on AIM. I was all in. I'd just been dumped by my loser high school boyfriend, and Brian was incredibly sweet and always knew what to say. There were some red flags for sure. Whenever I would finally convince him to send me a picture, he looked a little different in each photo. Like they could have been pictures of different people, but it looked similar enough and the guy liner was on point, so I just accepted it. We also never talked on the phone. I would beg him to let me call him, but he always had an excuse. Finally, the summer before I left for college, he let me call him and his voice was super fucking weird. My friend was convinced it was like a 50-year-old woman, but I was like, hell no, this is Brian. I was so blinded that I ignored every warning sign. I told him everything. He knew all of my passwords, everything about my day-to-day life. I mean, literally every single one of my friends told me he wasn't real, that I needed to stop being such a dumbass. But I honestly loved him. That fall, I left for college. My first roommate was a total windbag who had a mile-long list of rules for the room. No boys ever allowed in. I wasn't allowed to touch her Left Behind series she proudly displayed. No guests after 8 p.m., etc. So I was desperate to bounce. I found out that there was an empty room and requested a transfer for winter semester. I knew going in blind was a risk, but it couldn't be worse than Left Behind chick. At the same time, I was loving everything else about college. Things with Brian kind of waned because life was busy, and I wanted to experience everything, also known as other dudes. He would call me 20 times a day, message me all the time, constantly barrage me about whether or not I had a Facebook and wanted the password to it. Yeah, no. Finally, I broke things off for good. The next semester, I moved into my awesome new room. My roommate was a fellow freshman from Massachusetts who transferred that semester. She was loaded, brought basically everything we would both need for the room. Her mom even got us matching bedding from Pottery Barn. I mean, it was fucking awesome. She was a little weird, and like always wanted to hang out the first week, but I figured it was just nerves. The first weekend after classes started, I was chilling with some friends in the quad area, and she came over and threw her keys at me and was like, "Have fucking fun with these losers." I was like, what the hell is going on? I ended up sleeping at one of my girlfriend's rooms that night because I was super freaked out. The next day, it was like nothing happened. We hung out that whole week. She was very perceptive and helpful, and I was amped to have met what I thought would be my college bestie. The next weekend, I convinced her to come out, and we were having a blast, dancing with dudes, and then things were escalating with me and soccer jock, so I let her know I was bailing. We were a 2-minute walk from the soccer house and came with a group, so I figured, hey, no big deal. I got back to the room later that night, and I see that shit is torn the fuck up. Clothes ripped out of the closet, stuff all over the floor, and she was sitting on my bed and her arm was bleeding. I asked her what the hell was going on. She had broken my coffee cup and carved my fucking initials in her arm. I ran and got an RA because I'm not trying to get murdered. She ended up getting committed that night and her parents flew down. And this is where shit got even weirder. She was Brian. She told her parents, they told me. He decided to try to start things with me as like her true self, applied to my school and called the housing department to request me as a roommate, emailed housing from my email and requested her as my roommate, and then deleted the emails. Her parents apologized, said I could keep all of the stuff in the room, that they withdrew her from classes, and left. I got a no-contact order and the craziest story of my life.